As we look back over the last at least 50 years of Heritage's legacy, the work that they've been doing, I know for me, even though I haven't yet been around for 50 years, it's easy for me to feel nostalgic for the way things were, to kind of wish that maybe we lived in a country where we had the same issues that we were facing in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, issues that, of course, at the time we felt were very big. They were consequential, but today seem a little bit quaint, or at least less complicated than some of the issues that we're facing today. Because while politics have always been messy, the culture war has always been waged, I think that we can agree that the problems that we have today are different, right? They're maybe a little bit deeper, a little bit more fundamental and foundational than the problems that we were facing 50, 40, 30 years ago, even 15 years ago. You've probably noticed, you're not crazy if you have noticed, that over the last 10 years, the progressive revolution, the culture war, has increased in speed. It has increased to this stunning clip, moving to erode our cultural, our moral foundations. And I think a lot of people are just now catching up to the changes that have happened, and they're looking back and they're saying, what started all of this? What started this fall? When did we move into this post-truth era where we can't distinguish between up and down and right and wrong and true and false? Now, for those of us who have been paying attention for any amount of time, we know that this didn't come from somewhere, from nowhere rather. So by redefining marriage and the family, perverting the definition of gender, exchanging impartial justice for social justice, further replacing merit-based structures with race-based incentives, assaulting religious liberty by targeting Christian businesses, for example, infringing upon free speech, especially that of college students, progressivism has sought to destroy all that we hold as good and right and true. In some ways, this has been happening for a long time, but certainly over the past decade, we have seen it manifest itself in more and more obvious and more destructive ways. And now we've seen something called institutional capture, where corporate America, academia, the public education system, science and medicine, scarily enough, much of the federal government, the media, even global institutions like the UN have all been, to an extent, captured by an ideology that brings with it only chaos, confusion, and weakness. And this institutional capture, the seeming inability to escape politics or to speak freely as a conservative Christian, sometimes you just want to watch a football game and not be bombarded with some kind of political message. This is all what makes us ache for a different time. 50 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever you believe was maybe a golden age in American culture. This is what makes us feel nostalgic when a company like Bud Light represented its actual customer base, and Gillette was actually marketing towards real men, when we could send our children to school and reasonably be confident that they would come back having learned how to read and not from a drag queen. But that's not where we live today. I have 2 toddlers, almost 4, almost 2. I have 1 on the way, and I fall into this temptation. Often I fall into this temptation of thinking, I wish that I didn't have the challenges. I wish that they didn't have the challenges that they are going to have to face. I wish that we lived in a simpler era. I find myself being anxious about all that I'll have to teach my children before they even reach kindergarten, to make sure they're prepared for the confusion that they will sooner or later encounter that I simply did not when I was growing up, and I know you didn't either. But I have to resist that temptation, and we really all do, because the fact of the matter is, and sometimes this is a brutal reality, we don't live in the past, and we're not going to the past. We're here today. We don't get to go back to whatever we believe was the better time in American history. We are not in simpler or saner times. We live in these crazy, chaotic times, and we have no choice but to come to terms with that. We have no choice but to face the fact that God has placed us in the here and the now, on the tiny speck of eternity on which He has placed us, both purposely and providentially. That because God does nothing accidentally or arbitrarily, we were placed when and where we were with a purpose. Nothing takes him by surprise. So I have to trust that the battle that we are facing today for sanity, for goodness, for stability, for fundamental truth, for freedom, for family, is the exact battle that we were made to face and are actually equipped to face. Nothing is neutral. We've certainly learned that, especially over the past few years. Curriculum, companies, commercials today all speak to a particular value system. There really is no neutrality in the culture war. I would argue that there really never has been, but certainly today we see that everything speaks to a moral worldview. The only question is ever which one. At one point, the values of faith and family and freedom were a given. We could reasonably expect them to be represented at school, in the media. That's not true today. These are not the values that we see in much of public life. These are the values that have to be unapologetically fought for. Yes, in the political realm, through good, wise policy that uses all the powers constitutionally available to us to protect people from all forms of the predation of progressivism, but even more than that, on the cultural level, we have to ensure the strength of our cultural institutions, the bedrock of any functioning society, the family, the church, community, even the education we offer to the next generation. So I say this to myself as much as I say it to others, rather than wallow in sadness or nostalgia that we aren't who we used to be. Parents, if we're talking specifically about the institution of the family, which is the keystone of any functioning society, parents should look with excitement at the task at hand. That means intentionally building up from the earliest age possible children and later adults who are wise, who are strong, who are generous, who are courageous. In an age when even conservative and Christian young people, college students, tell me, I don't know if I want to have children. This has really changed. This is a huge shift in American culture today, but they say, I don't know if I want to have children. And it's not because I don't like children. It's not typically because of the propaganda that has been put in front of them about climate change, but even conservative Christian young people are saying, I don't know if I want to have children because the world is so crazy today. It's not the world that I grew up in. It's not the world that my parents grew up in. I don't know if I want to bring children into this world. And what I tell them is that a crazy, chaotic world desperately needs stable, wise, strong, courageous, compassionate people. What we need more than anything is for smart and for brave young people to have children and to raise them in the way that they should go. There is no better antidote to the turbulent times that we live in than stable families. There's no better antidote in an age of confusion and cowardice than children who grow up to be agents of clarity and courage. We should be excited about that opportunity, that nothing is taken for granted, that the questions that our parents really didn't have to answer for us when we were young, what's the difference between a man and a woman? Where does all of this come from? What is right and wrong? We have not only the opportunity, but the responsibility and the equipment as parents, as grandparents today to make sure our children know the answers to these questions at an early age. And it's not just that. It's not just ensuring that our children know what is good and right and true, that our children are equipped to fight the battles that are ahead of them. This also speaks to what children of all different families are learning. So when I look at education for our family, that means ensuring that our children get an explicitly Christian education. That's the only option for us, but that's not the option for every family. And yet, I care, whether it's my children or not, what the children around my children are learning. Because I'm a taxpayer, because I'm a member of my neighborhood, a member of my community, I care about the curriculum that is being taught in schools. These are our future voters. These are our future leaders. So as much as I care about what my children are learning and the kind of people that they grow up to be, I also care about their peers. I also care about the people that they are growing up around. So as involved as we are in our own children's education, taking nothing for granted, we also must be As I like to say on my podcast, raising a respectful ruckus for the things that matter in the education system that's around us. As I already mentioned, nothing is neutral. There is no neutrality. Every bit of curriculum speaks to a particular worldview. Progressives would have us believe that only Christian conservatives have to check their worldview at the door before they enter a school, before they go to a school board meeting, before they go to a city council meeting, before they vote, before they run for office, before they advocate for curriculum or their kids at a school. That is not true. We have just as much of a seat at the table, just as much of a right to bring our values to the table, our values to the public square as they do. And if nothing is neutral, we have to take that right and responsibility very seriously. We're not pushing for a neutral world. We're pushing for a world in which we re-mainstream the values that we once were able to take for granted. And that is faith in a creator that has given us dignity, that has given us rights, belief in individual freedom where you can say and believe and worship as you see fit. These things that used to be a mainstay in American culture and are not today, they have to be explicitly fought for. And this means also that there should be a difference today in how we even conduct and lead our churches. Some pastors, some religious leaders and religious communities are scared to touch on these so-called controversial issues, these culture war issues that are wrecking our world today and sowing confusion and destruction, like gender, like abortion, like the destruction of the family. And so you get many pastors, many church leaders not wanting to touch them, thinking that they are going to divide their congregation or that they are going to sow some kind of division within their churches. But gone are the days when we are able to leave those things off the table. The fact of the matter is, for the Christian, and I can only speak as a Christian, these are not primarily political or cultural issues. These are primarily biblical issues. These are the questions, these are the issues about which young people have questions today. What is the truth about abortion? What is the truth about gender? What is the truth about marriage? What is the truth about childbearing? What is justice? What are rights? What is right and wrong? These are just as much spiritual issues as they are culture issues. These are just as much spiritual, theological issues as they are political issues. And so, yes, of course we care about policy. And I'm so thankful for all of the work that the Heritage Foundation has done in that realm, but something that they also understand, one of the reasons why they asked me to speak is because politics is always going to be downstream from culture. Culture is always going to be downstream from theology. The fight that we are in today is primarily a spiritual war, if I can say something that may be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's true. The fight that we are in today is much deeper than we see on the political realm. It is just as much spiritual, it is just as much moral, it is just as much cultural, it is just as much familial, it is just as much communal as it is political. And so in every sphere that we occupy, again, on this tiny speck of eternity on which God has purposely and providentially placed us, let us be ambassadors for, let us be advocates for, unabashedly, what is good and right and true. I get asked all the time by young moms, that's my primary audience, what do we do? What do I do about this craziness? How do I change the world? How do I change the future for the better for my kids? And none of us as individuals have the capacity to change the world. All you can do is the next right thing in faith with excellence and for the glory of God. Now, sometimes for the people in my audience, that means literally changing a diaper. That means washing the dishes. For some people, it might mean running for political office. It might mean going to your school board meeting. It might mean going to church. It might be starting a church. There are big and small things that all of us are responsible for, but all of us are responsible for changing the culture in the spheres that we occupy. That can make a difference. I would not be doing what I do if I didn't think change was possible, if I didn't think that we could push the culture war, push the darkness back. I see change in my generation. I see moms waking up. I see, as much as you hear the opposite on the news, people realizing their need for God, people realizing how backwards that culture has become, people realizing that they want a better world for their kids, people realizing that the public education system has completely abandoned its responsibility to actually teach children. I see an awakening. I think it's possible. All of us have to take the responsibilities that we have with our families, with our churches, with our jobs, to push back against the lies that we see in our culture today. Change is possible. With God, all things are possible. You wouldn't be here if you weren't confident in that too. So thank you, no matter what generation you're a part of, for passing down the torch to me, to the people in my generation. Now that I'm the ripe old age of 31, I see myself looking back and doing the same thing for college students. But be confident that God has placed us in the here and the now for a reason. He is up to something. God's work doesn't always make headlines, but he is always working, and I think it's for the better. Thank you so much.